Desert Oracle Radio, the voice of the desert.
Night has fallen on the desert that has given us so much. Wildflowers and cactus blooms, hummingbirds and chuckwallas, or even water, even some water in moderation, everything in moderation. The desert is the birthplace of our ancient religions, too, including the religion very much in the news this week, the ancient Church of Rome, founded by St. Peter in the middle years of the 1st century A.D. Peter got his famous name from Jesus, who called him Cephas, Aramaic for rock. Tough, rough, and tumble. And in the Greek spoken by so many in those days, it was Petros, from Petra for rock or stone. We have to figure that Jesus spoke at least 3 languages day to day, or week to week. The Hebrew he read from Torah in the temple, that's one. The Aramaic, that was the everyday tongue of the Jews. And the Greek spoken by the upper classes and the business world. After all, the Levant had been ruled by the Greek and Macedonian descendants of Alexander for centuries by that point. And the Romans were relatively new in the area in the 1st century BC, and by that time the Romans were completely enthralled by Greek culture, Greek language, Greek philosophy, Greek architecture, Greek gods. Latin was mostly reserved for legal and bureaucratic business, but there was enough regular trade with the capital that anyone who traveled in a wide social and professional circle probably spoke a little Latin too. The sarcastic royal title attached to the cross of Jesus by the Romans, King of the Jews, was rendered in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Simon Peter was Shimon ben Yonah, or Simon son of Jonah, or Simon son of John. He was a fisherman living and working on the Sea of Galilee, engaged with his brothers in the important trade of sardines, carp, and tilapia, the latter known today as St. Peter's fish. Sardines are usually thought of as saltwater fish, but the Galilean herring, or Kinneret sardine, is one of the exceptions, thriving in the deep brackish waters of that inland lake, which is about a third the size of our own Lake Tahoe here in the western United States. On the western shore of the Kinneret Sea, a town called Magdala was the center of the fishing trade, packing fish for local and export markets. Here, the catch was pickled, salted, put in sealed jars with water or oil, and used for the production of garum. Garum was the fish sauce the Romans used on everything, similar to Worcestershire sauce, which was reconstructed by chemists in Worcester from a garum-style fish sauce an English nobleman had supposedly enjoyed while serving the British Empire somewhere on the southern shores of India. Simon and his brother Andrew were disciples of John the Baptist, who also baptized Jesus. John had preached and baptized in the River Jordan, gathering followers by the hundreds, by the thousands. And the Galileans cast their nets in the Sea of Galilee. So these fishermen knew exactly what Jesus was talking about when he said, "Follow me, I will make you fishers of men."
Desert Oracle Radio.
Jesus collected another pair of early disciples from this same shore, calling out to the sons of Zebedee, John and James, who were working with their father and the hired servants. And straightway they departed the boat and followed him. "I quit. Take this job and shove it." Well, that's a lot of fishing and boating talk for a story about the religion rising up from the desert, you might be thinking by now. Well, the religion of Jesus and his disciples is said to have originated in the arid wilderness of the Sinai Peninsula, particularly upon Mount Sinai itself, which was home to a prehistoric moon cult, still in evidence amongst the Bedouin there 1,400 years ago. In the last years before the Sinai's conquest by Islam. The great prophets, Elijah and Isaiah and the rest, would either retreat to or come out from the desert wilderness beyond the milder climes of Jerusalem and the farming and fishing towns and the coastal cities. Jesus was firmly of this tradition, retreating to the mountain wilds a dozen times during the short narratives of the Gospels. It's where he went after his baptism by John in the Jordan. It's where he headed whenever the press of the crowds and the increasing notoriety of his ministry prevented him from having any rest, any peace and quiet, any time to pray and meditate, to work it out. An exception is when he preached from Simon Peter's own fishing boat and told the skipper to head out for deeper waters. As the faithful and the curious and the sick seeking to be healed were now wading into the lake and in danger of overtaking the small craft, which led to another fishing story from Luke chapter 5, but you can read that yourself after the broadcast. Simon Peter, known as St. Peter today, was one of 3 leaders who emerged after the departure of Jesus Christ, who himself emerged following the execution of his own teacher, John the Baptist. There was James the Just, brother of Jesus, who led the early church in Jerusalem, and Paul of Tarsus, who evangelized widely in the Greek and Roman Mediterranean. Simon Peter wound up in the capital too, Roma, and all 3 were martyred. James the Just was thrown from the walls of the temple and then beaten and stoned to death. That's a rough way to go. Peter and Paul both came to their end in Rome. But Paul, being a Roman citizen, was spared the horror of crucifixion and instead executed by beheading, a swift end by the sword. Simon Peter, having led the first Christian church of Rome for many years, is said to have been crucified in the reign of Nero, in a place of great power, the place where the mysterious Vates had long practiced their religion, in the hilltop sacred grove outside of Roma called Vaticanus. From the word meaning oracle, seer, prophet, poet. Another mysterious loan word from the Etruscans, probably. who ruled Rome until they were pushed out of power at some point, likely much later than the birth of Romulus and Remus. But Vates is likely of Italo-Celtic or even Proto-Indo-European origin, coming from the same root word that gives us woden, wood, word. Some say the hilltop or high place was consecrated to the Etruscan goddess Vatica, whoever she is. But by Virgil's time, Vates referred to inspired poets. And when the Pope returned to Rome after the 7 decades of the Avignon papacy, it was to the Hill of the Vates, where during Nero's reign, St. Peter was crucified as a public spectacle at Nero's Circus of Rome, which had been constructed among the cruel Caesar's gardens there. The year was AD 64, following the Great Fire of Rome, which Nero blamed on the Christians and their bishop, Simon Peter. This week, upon that same fabled hilltop, the Catholic Church chose a new Bishop of Rome, Robert Francis Prevost. I don't know what it was. We're going to call him Pope Leo now, anyway. From Chicago, Illinois, or the south side suburbs of Chicago, anyway. Where's Mike Royko when you need him? Let's get back to the desert, because we need to talk about another Catholic clergyman, but from County Kerry, Ireland, instead of Chicago. Just over a century ago, in the year 1919, this priest took on the responsibility of a vast geographic region of few people and great natural wonders. The great natural cathedrals of America, celebrated by John Muir, and preserved by the National Park System and the United States Federal Wilderness System. If you've run around this most beautiful part of the world, the Eastern Sierra, you know Crowley Lake and Crowley Vista Point, and maybe even the rare Crowley Lupine of the Sierra's eastern slope. All three are named for Father John J. Crowley, the Padre of the desert. Born December 8, 1891, John J. Crowley was 12 years old when his family immigrated to Massachusetts. And in 1911, Crowley entered Holy Cross College right there in his adopted hometown of Worcester. A talented writer and a charismatic storyteller, he often contributed to his college's literary journals and the campus newspaper, skills he would continue to develop and practice while attending seminary, and then taking orders to serve in Los Angeles when he had become a priest. Priests were in very short supply out west, while the population of Catholics and everybody else was rapidly growing in California in the 1920s. And in 1924, Father Crowley volunteered to be the sole priest covering the vast eastern Sierra, Mount Whitney to Death Valley and everywhere in between, including the whole of Inyo and Mono counties, the eastern half of Kern County, and the vast desert backcountry of San Bernardino County, home of the Great Mojave Wilderness. Father Crowley began his lifelong love of the Owens Valley, serving congregations from Bishop to Barstow, and serving them in ways that far exceeded what is generally asked of a country preacher. He did his priestly duties with flair and skill and dedication up and down the spine of the Sierra Nevada and its companion ranges. At the beginning of the vast basin and range system that stretches for hundreds and hundreds of miles until the Rockies, until the plains. But he said mass and cared for his flock from baptism to marriage to burial. He took confession. He gave good counsel to all who needed it, regardless of creed. The talented Father Crowley was not allowed to linger too long in the beautiful backcountry. In 1924, he was brought to Fresno to oversee St. John's Cathedral, and where he was instrumental in the founding of St. Columba's High School. It's a fact that his fundraising and promotional abilities resulted in a Fresno exhibition game featuring Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. But the desert called, as it always does, to those who appreciate its power and beauty, to those who find both God and their calling in the desert, in the wilderness. A decade later, Father Crowley was back over the Sierras, back on the east side. It was on this second tour of duty when Father Crowley also became the best friend the Owens Valley ever had, acting as promoter of outdoor tourism and movie location shoots, spokesman for the natural wonders of this then little-known land of little rain, and an even-handed diplomat in the notorious Owens Valley water wars instigated by the Department of Water and Power down in Los Angeles, a metropolis that was as strongly tied to the Eastern Sierra then as it is today, although the roads weren't so good. The agricultural paradise that Crowley had known a decade earlier in the Owens Valley had become a poverty-stricken wasteland since the water rights were bought up and dammed up and channeled south by the water agency down in L.A. The Owens Valley would need new industry to survive and thrive, and the Desert Padre directed his substantial energies into the creation of both the film location and the outdoor paradise sectors that still bring people and money to the Eastern Sierra today. This was in the 1930s, when Lone Pine and its glorious Alabama hills became the home of the Western movie and big-budget Hollywood epic. The world of Hopalong Cassidy and Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Leo Carrillo and Cary Grant all became friends of the sociable Desert Padre, who all the while was putting the Eastern Sierra on the permanent map of film location scouts. More than 500 movies and television shows have been shot in the Alabama hills alone in the days since Father Crowley came back to the Owens Valley to stay. And we could fill this episode with nothing but the titles of such productions that made use of the stupendous scenery: Gladiator, Iron Man, Django Unchained, The Postman, Tremors, Joe Kidd, Zabriskie Point, How the West Was Won, Gunga Din, several Star Wars and Star Trek installments, and, of course, Tarzan's Desert Mystery, 1952. Can't forget that one. Hundreds of TV commercials and music videos and other such productions have also been shot in and around the Owens Valley. If you ever see a car or truck commercial during the Super Bowl, chances are it was shot somewhere along the 395. The journalist Irving Stone wrote in a 1944 Saturday Evening Post feature remembering the popular priest. Crowley worked constantly for religious tolerance. Protestants forgave him for being a Catholic, and the Catholics forgave him for having so many Protestant friends. The Desert Padre was an understanding father to whom the frightened, the weary, and the confused could come for comfort and help. Along with his full-time duties for the Catholic Church and his relentless propaganda for his beloved Owens Valley, including the organization of a great parade in October 1937 to mark the opening of Highway 190 between the highest point and lowest point in the 48 United States, Mount Whitney and Badwater. Father Crowley also wrote more than 200 folksy newspaper columns of lore and local news published under the byline In Yokel. Inyo, yokel, you see? The column was called Sage and Tumbleweed. Yes, he said the first known Catholic Mass at Mount Whitney's peak, or in the Smithsonian cabin near the peak. And he got the Los Angeles Times to cover it with a photographer, too. And he got Inyo and Mono counties to make the first day of trout season an official county government holiday. And his firm conviction that the Long Valley Dam should be rebuilt to provide more water to Owens Valley resulted in exactly that. This last feat was after Crowley actually locked LADWP's chief water engineer, H.C. Van Norman, in a meeting room, quote, until the exasperated engineer conceded to request to build a new dam that would restore water to the impoverished desert. When the dam was completed, the new lake it created was named Crowley Lake. What a life! If you lived half the life of Father Crowley, a third of his life, a quarter of it, you're living at a very high level. As it turned out, Father Crowley did not live much more than half a life compared to the standard 70 or 12, what is it, from the Bible. Driving back home to Lone Pine after a work trip on the other side of the Sierra, Father Crowley swerved to miss a steer that wandered onto Highway 14 and right into an oncoming truck. John J. Crowley was killed in the crash, age 40. His community grieved. His far-flung congregations and companions from Bishop, Lone Pine, Keeler, Furnace Creek, Big Pine, Independence, and his many friends in Fresno, in the Central Valley, Los Angeles, San Francisco. The whole state of California claimed him as their own, with good reason. Father Crowley Vista Point along Highway 190 between Owens Lake and Panamint Springs is always worth a stop when you're making that scenic drive. And not just for the memories of the Desert Padre and the beautiful overlook that bears his name. In the years since 1977's hit movie Star Wars became the biggest film to ever feature scenes of Death Valley, doubling in the movie as the desert planet Tatooine, generations of real-life fighter pilots have used the deep twisting canyon along the roadside as a hot rod flying ace test course that they call Jedi Canyon. When you're standing on the overlook, you look down on the passing fighter jets. It's incredible. If you're lucky enough to be there when one shoots by, one or two, with the great roar of the engines. That's one of many interesting and iconic locations where you can pay your respects to Father John J. Crowley. Another is the Dow Villa Motel next to the Old West Dow Hotel, because Santa Rosa Catholic Church used to stand at that spot. That was once consecrated ground where our beloved priests so often performed the ancient Mass. And there's a historical marker along with a cross made of iron pipe, if that's still there, just off Highway 14 where it meets State Route 178, coming out of the Kern County High Country, where the road heads up to Lake Isabella and the pretty little village of Kernville. In 1940, that would have been the fastest way back to Lone Pine from the Bay Area, cutting across from Bakersfield to Inyokern on the newly completed State Route 178. There used to be a town there, too, a little town called Freeman or Freeman Junction, which really deserves an episode of its own. And that's right where the 178 meets Highway 14, where it's just about to merge onto Highway 395 north, which used to be US 6, but which now doesn't start until just past the Vons and Bishop. US 6, the Grand Army of the Republic Highway. Now, it once had its western terminus in Long Beach, California, at today's PCH and Atlantic Avenue, if you're wondering. But let's go back to the Father Crowley Memorial just off California State Route 14, south of Olancha. Be careful turning onto the 178, especially if you're headed north. There are ramps on the southbound side, but be careful either way. Remember, Father Crowley died in a car crash right here. Say a prayer for the Desert Padre. Why not? What can it hurt? I bet he'd appreciate it. He'd probably appreciate this episode of Desert Oracle Radio with soundscapes by RedBlueBlackSilver because it's publicity for the beautiful Owens Valley and the East Side. And this program is a long-time chart-topping podcast in the travel category. Thanks to Kelly in Las Vegas, and Mike Sims in Corday, Madera, and Christopher Hall in Atlanta, and D.A. EvoSearch in Presque Isle, Michigan, for the mail and support of this show. Thanks to all of you on Patreon. Good night from the voice of the desert.